Hi everyone, I'm Noel Altan Jr. and today we will all be talking about the urinary system. So first, we all like to eat. Eating by yourself, eating with your friends and families. We all also know that eating is very important to keep us alive. But after digesting the food, metabolizing the food, we are all left with a lot of waste. Not that kind of waste that is being left on the table, the crumbs, and the unfinished food. We're talking about the chemical, toxic waste inside of our body that, if left unattended, can cause death. So, in your body, a lot of the cleaning or the cleanup that comes after metabolism is handled by the liver, which plays a tremendous role in directing blood cells and leftover chemicals to the digestive and urinary system. Your liver cannot exactly escort waste outside of you. Your lungs can help in exhaling carbon dioxide waste outside your body, and your colon eventually poops out the unwanted and unusable stuff, dead cells, outside of your body. But much of your chemical waste still needs to be sorted, filtered, and also cleaned up, and that is the use of your urinary system. This system, specifically your kidneys, does all sorts of important homeostatic stuff like regulating your water volume, iron salt concentrations, and pH levels, and influencing your red blood cell production and blood pressure. But what we are going to discuss is how it filters toxic leftovers from your blood, like nitrogenous waste made by metabolizing proteins, and ferries it out of your body. And this includes the why, how, and what of your pee. So now you probably know that kidneys filter out waste, just like if you're taking a bath and then you can see the water being filtered out and a ball of hair remains. Well, that is not how it works. An example is when you are cleaning a fridge. You don't clean out your fridge by just taking out the rotten foods and vegetables and the fuzzy leftovers. Instead, you gotta take everything out and put it into a counter and sort through what goes back into the fridge and what goes into the trash. So you may remember that amino acids are unique and that they have nitrogen and amino gap because we can store amino acids. Extra ones get processed into storable carbs or fats. See, amine groups isn't used in those storage molecules, so it's converted to NH3 or ammonia, which happens to be toxic. So the liver converts the ammonia to a less toxic urea. So with this, the urea is being disposed through micturition or urination. Kidneys are a pair of dark red, fist-sized, bean-shaped organs that sit on each side of your spine against a posterior body wall. Kidneys are retroperitoneal, which means they lie between the dorsal wall and the peritoneum, the membrane that surrounds the abdominal cavity, rather than inside the cavity itself, like your intestines and your stomachs. Each kidney has three distinct layers, beginning with the outermost cortex. Beneath that is the medulla, a set of core-shaped masses of tissue that secrete urine into tiny sac-like tubules, and finally the innermost layer is the renal pelvis, a funnel-shaped tube surrounded by a smooth muscle that uses peristalsis to move urine out of the kidney into the ureter and into the bladder. Oxygenated blood enters the kidney through the large renal artery, which delivers nearly a quarter of all blood pumped to the heart every minute. That means that your kidney filters 120 to 140 liters of blood every day. They enter the kidneys. Renal arteries branch many times, ending in tons of little capillary groups. Well, kidney is not just one big filter. Instead, each one is made up of a million twisty microscopic filtering units called nephrons. Structurally and functionally, nephrons are where the real business of blood processing begins.
in three steps: filtration, reabsorption, and secretion. Each nephron is consists of a round renal corpuscle that resides up in the cortex, followed by a long and winding renal tubule that loops around between the cortex and the medulla. The other part of the corpuscle is a cup-shaped feature called the glomerular capsule, because inside it there is a whole tangle of capillaries called glomerulus, which is from a Latin word for a ball of urine. Then the individual of the capillaries is very porous, so they allow lots of fluid waste products, ions, glucose, and amino acids to pass from blood into the capsules. But they block out bigger molecules like blood cells and proteins, so they stay in the blood and exit through the paratubular capillaries, also known as vasa recta.
Now all this stuff gets squeezed out the blood into the glomerulus is called filtrate, which is then sent to the elaborately twisting 3 centimeter long renal tubule.
Even though it looks like a simple tube, it actually has three major parts, some of which are permeable to certain substances but not to others. First is the proximal convoluted tubule or PCT, which is about as convoluted looking as what its name suggests. Then the tubule drops in the nephron loop or the loop of Henle, and then finally ends in the distal convoluted tubule or DCT, which empties into a collecting duct.
Now all this stuff gets squeezed out the blood into the glomerulus is called filtrate, which is then sent to the elaborately twisting 3 centimeter long renal tubule. All those twisting can make the tubule look like super inefficient, but actually it serves an important purpose as what you might expect.
Just like with the small intestines, the long curly shape of the nephron provides more time and space for it to reabsorb whatever usable stuff it can.
And this meandering path also allows the parts of the tubules that are towards the end to have an effect on the process that takes place closer to the beginning as they pass each other, because a lot of the stuff that winds up in the tube are valuable commodities like irons, glucose, and water, and we don't want them just to be excreted outside of our body if we can help it.
So let's trace this process starting at the top with the proximal convoluted tubule or PCT. The walls here are made with cuboidal epithelial cells with big mitochondria to make ATP that power pumps that pulls lots of sodium ions from the filtrate using active transport. These cells are also covered with microvilli that increase the surface area and help reabsorb much of the good stuffs from the filtrate back to the blood. The remaining filtrate passes into the loop of Henle, which starts into the cortex and then dips into the medulla before coming back into the cortex.
And the form of this loop is the key to its function because its primary purpose or task is to drive the reabsorption of water by creating a salt concentration gradient in the tissue of the medulla.
It does this by mainly actively pumping out salt in the ascending limb. This creates very salty interstitial fluid in the medulla, so that when new filtrate comes down the descending loop in front of it, water passively flows out and into the super salty interstitial space.
Since most of this water is picked up by the blood pretty quickly, the saltiness of the interstitial space doesn't get diluted, so it can get drawing water out of the next batch of filtrated descending limb. Needless to say, this is very important because if we peed out all of the water that went out from our kidney, we would die quickly from dehydration. But even after all of those, we are still 2/3 of the process.
As you move out of the loop of Henle in the distal convoluted tubule and into the collecting duct, the remaining filtrate is already urine.
But we still have one component that we need to squeeze out the most of. It is the urea. The kidneys actually need it. They use it to ramp up the concentration gradient earlier in the process, making the medulla even saltier for the filtrate that's back there going through the ascending lymph.
In the final steps after the filtrate enters the DCT, it enters the collecting duct which runs back into the medulla.
And while the salt passively draw even more water out of the collecting duct, the urea passively leaves the urine as well, making the medulla more salty and in turn more effective at drawing out water from the ascending limb few steps back. So there is essentially a traveling pool of urea that escapes the urine, finds its way back in the loop of Henle, and then runs into the full course again back into the collecting duct.
Ammonia-scented cycle called urea recycling. Now all that's left is the last call to selectively sneak out on any extra waste like hydrogen, potassium, and certain organic acids and bases using active transport.
It is called tubular secretion, and it transports only selected kinds of waste that have already made its way to the blood that is in the paratubular capillaries, ready to leave the kidneys. It's kind of like you are cleaning your pockets with any last scabs of paper or tissue and a crumpled receipt as you are walking a bag of trash into the dump. And that's how your kidneys cleans up the mess of your food that you have metabolized. So if you thought that your kidneys were just a set of fine mesh to clear and to absorb the water and filter out the bad stuffs, then you're wrong. If you thought that your urinary system was water goes in and peace goes out, then that's definitely not true. So now you have learned how the anatomy of the urinary system works, how your kidneys filter metabolic waste, balance salt and water concentrations in the body. Specifically, you learned how nephrons use glomerular filtration, tubular reabsorption, and tubular secretions to reabsorb water nutrients back into the blood and make urine with the leftovers. So once again, this is Noel L. Tan Jr. and this is my urinary system presentation. Thank you.